mentioned, today's sermon, as you have the notes as well, is about an epic story. Now, I want to share a couple of things with you because only Austin can really appreciate this as much because it's about Austin. So he's over to our house this past week, and we're telling Austin about the epic story. We're telling about SEP and all of those things, and then Austin graciously listens to us, and then he leaves. And maybe a couple hours later, Karen says to me, "Wait a minute. Austin heard this. He went to Converge." And that's where they were discussing all of these things. And we're trying to tell him something he already knew. And I think, oh my. And then on top of that, the answer is correct. It is Lawson. But I only know him as Jim. So we were having this discussion about an individual that we knew. And he knew him by his official name, which is Lawson. And it was later that in the middle of the night, about 2 o'clock in the morning, that I thought, oh my, he's right again. And I'm thinking, old folk, they're just problematic. But that's part of the epic story. You think of old people and the things that they have done and the like. Well, I want to share with you what we were sharing with the young people. And so Austin's heard this now 3 times. Is it 3, Austin, or 4 now? So I'm going to let you say whatever it is. But to start with, the theme was from Ephesians chapter 2, verses 1 through 10. And basically, for sake of time, and I'm going to have to, because I've got to get to Modesto and all of that, is I'm going to share with you that Paul starts with, in this particular chapter, in times past, this is who we were. We had our lives really messed up. We were doing this. We were following the prince of the air. We were living a life just like the city of Ephesus was living in that day and age and when he wrote the letter. Ephesus at that time was a port city. It was a sailor city, as well as being a city of gods, that is small g's. They had, Minerva there. They had Diana there. They had all the different gods. But on top of that, not only did they have that, they had all the Caesars. They had to this Caesar, to that Caesar, to this governor, to that governor. They had temples all over the place. So they were living a wanton life. And, as a Christian, when you're in the middle of Sin City and you think, because you get the Vegas way of thinking. When in Vegas, what you do in Vegas stays in Vegas. What you do in Ephesus stays in Ephesus. You can begin to have that kind of mentality. And so the Apostle Paul was saying to them, look, we've been in this in times past, but God has called us out of this now, and that our lives are changed and they're transformed. That's been part of our story. That is a chapter in our life. But now let's move forward. And in moving forward, he says, these are some of the things that we need to know and understand and to appreciate. Now, Paul himself has quite an epic story in the sense that what he did, who he was prior as Saul, and then his transformation as the Apostle Paul. And for him, that was an incredible transformation. And as Austin, again, in our conversation this past week, we're talking about salvation. We're talking about that moment in time when you knew that God was working in your life. And for some people, like the Apostle Paul, that was a very dramatic event. I mean, none of us have had that kind of dramatic event. We think about Pentecost. We haven't had a Pentecost experience like that. Fire, tongues of fire coming down, hearing everybody, everyone hearing God in their own language. We haven't had that. But as Karen was mentioning, we think about the epic story, and this is going to be the bottom line. We are part of an epic story, but that epic story really is about God and what God is doing. But it's very difficult for us to separate that a bit because we want to get our story before God's story and the like. So that happens. And so as we were talking about salvation, and I'm thinking, well, I've had some experiences as a young kid. Karen was talking about an experience that he had. But the reality to that epic story is long before we ever came along, there was a God who had an epic story of our salvation. That is, they had made plans that they were going to save their creation. They were going to redeem that creation. They were going to reconcile that creation. And what they had made was incredibly good. And they were going to bring it back or give it life in real life. So that's part of the epic story of the Apostle Paul. He had quite an experience on the road to Damascus. Most of us have never been to Damascus, nor will we ever be to Damascus, and we're not going to get struck down like that. But that doesn't make our story any less than the Apostle Paul. So when we look at this, we recognize, as Paul is telling us here, reminds us of our former life. And our former life is a bad chapter. We've got some bad chapters in our life. We look back, maybe we're thinking our teenage years and how we responded, did things, maybe in our early adulthood, and as we're trying to navigate our way through relationships and situations. There are a few bad chapters, I would guess, that all of us have in our life. When we're without God, we're mad at the world. We're mad at the acne on our face. We're why is this happening to me? All of these things. We all have a few bad chapters, and some of them are a little bit short. But then Paul tells us in verse 3 of Ephesians chapter 2, this is how he's including himself in all of this. It's important for us to understand. So he's not just saying, you folk had this problem. He says, we, in our former lives, that's how that we have been. And as I mentioned, there are chapters without God. There are chapters of meanness and hatefulness. There's chapters of despair. And by the way, when I speak of chapters of despair, for those getting older, that chapter could be still ahead of you when you think, I can't see, I can't chew, I can't hear, I can't feel, I can't, and all of those things. And we tend to despair. That may be a chapter could be a chapter, or it could be written that way. Or it could be written a little differently. And hopefully today, that chapter, even as we move forward, will be edited. We can make edits now for that future chapter that lies ahead of us. So, this is the story. So I'd like to tell you, and these are two stories that they brought out. Now, again, Jeff Broadnax was the guest speaker. And so, having mentioned him, this is where kind of the story begins in camp. He missed his airline flight. His son made it in the bags, but he and his daughter missed it. So his son and the baggage arrived early, or with the son. That was one trip to Reno and back to Tahoe, and he arrived late that night. And with his daughter, little daughter, 6 years old, in that. But he arrived just after the transformer blew and took out all the electricity at camp. So it's pitch black. Oh, that's just a little bit before the construction company came in to fix the problem, who cut the water line to take out the water because it wasn't marked. That's just a little before. That happened a little before they cut the sewer line that took out that. So that's not exactly how mine started, because I finally got him there in the dark using the great technology of a phone light, getting him in, showing him there is your hard bed with your sleeping bag, and that's where you're going to sleep. And over here, let me make sure there's no bears, because there have been bears in the camp just earlier in the week. At which time, it's like 10:30 or 10:45, and I'm thinking, yes, I'm going home, because we were staying off campus. I'm going home to a soft bed so I can get a little rest, so I can get started. At which time my phone rang, because I was designated chaplain.
Feeling the blues today, or tired of life already? Do you have questions about life, or need spiritual advice? The Worldwide Church of God is located in Fairfield, Santa Rosa, and Modesto, California. We welcome everyone to attend our worship services with us every week at the times listed on your screen.